Okay, teaser number 2, Steph Curry. As long as he keeps going with these Steve Kerr plans and keep joining him for this ride and thinking that it's all okay and fine and dandy, well, get compromised. Let your legacy be compromised. Don't make it to the All-Star game as a starter because you're not playing like one that deserves to be an All-Star starter. Get called a shooter by people around the league because that's the role that you play, like you have Steve Kerr's name in the back of your jersey rather than Steph Curry. Keep wasting entire first quarters and third quarters doing absolutely nothing and running cardio all day while letting your teammates flounder without you being more involved. All in the name of, well, you're a nice guy and you're kind and you care about your relationships. Well, let your legacy get bent then. Let it get bent. To be honest with you, Steph Curry, you really should be listening to me a lot more than you listen to Steve Kerr because Steve Kerr has never had the level of belief in you the way I have had since your rookie year, damn it. Do you remember when I told to your face that you need to be separated from Monte Ellis for you to become what you could become? Because if you kept playing next to Monte Ellis, you never would have become the player that you became. But you being the nice guy that you are, you would have never wanted to have separated from Monte Ellis, right? I'm going to try to hit on some really important key points in this video. I plan on making a detailed separate video on some of these matters, but I will hit you guys with some teasers. It's going to help explain what must happen for this Warriors team if they want to turn their season around. Needless to say, you know how I feel about Steve Kerr. All the things he does on a game-by-game basis, simply brain-dead decisions. The guy literally has the basketball IQ of a goldfish. But there's another problem, and it's a really big one, and that is Steph Curry and his willingness, willfulness, and collaboration with Steve Kerr on all the things that he wants to do and fighting back against none of it. So at this point, Steph Curry is a part of the problem. He's just too nice, he's just too conforming, and no matter how dissatisfied he may be with something, he acts like he has no authority over this team. He is the superstar, the franchise player, and ultimately he has the biggest say out of anybody outside of Joe Lacob. Steph Curry, if unhappy, dissatisfied, feels that there needs to be changes and whatever, he can override anybody on this franchise, including Steve Kerr, including Mike Dunleavy. That is how powerful Steph Curry is if you think about it. That is how true franchise caliber players generally like to operate if they feel like the team is doing ridiculous things that are not conducive to the overall success of what they can do. And it obviously affects Steph Curry's career as an all-time player when you do these things. Well, at some point, he's going to have to speak up and stand up against it. And he basically never does. So after a tough win against a struggling Timberwolves team that just lost to the Hawks tonight too, by the way, the Warriors come out with their most typical, lackadaisical, no energy, casual style of play. Steph Curry plays the first 5 minutes of the game, takes no shots, is basically completely uninvolved, and is doing cardio out there, and then he takes a seat. Curry didn't take his first shot until the 10.5-minute mark of the second quarter. And this kind of passivity is going to ensure that he will never be in rhythm throughout the course of this game. And that is the perfect recipe to ensure the Warriors have next to no chance of winning any given game. You can certainly make some arguments that Steph Curry was being double teamed and hounded and stuff like this anyway, so he often had to get rid of the ball. But if you truly want Steph Curry to be aggressive, there are always ways to ensure that he's getting up as many shots as he can, making sure that he is putting the fear of God into the other team's defense just by electing to be more aggressive. That is what teams fear the most. Certain teams kind of fall asleep with the Warriors offense and forget about Steph Curry. And you kind of saw that with the Timberwolves in the previous game. But Rick Carlisle is almost always hell-bent on making sure that he puts a stop to Steph Curry. So when the Warriors run motion, obviously they're taking out Steph Curry for the other team, so they don't actually even have to be aggressive with him other than just top blocking him. When he's standing in the corner and not doing anything anyway, it just doesn't matter. But in the second quarter, when he did try to get on the ball and start being a little more aggressive, well, that's when the hard traps came, the double teams came, and all this kind of stuff. And in those scenarios, it really would help the Warriors if they had at least 2 viable screeners on the floor. And once again, Steve Kerr tonight elected to take Slo-Mo out of the rotation completely. Persistently went with lineups that either had JK as a power forward or Andrew Wiggins as a power forward. And once again, I'd like to clarify, I'm never ever blaming Andrew Wiggins or Jonathan Kuminga for not being good enough at the power forward spot. I'm only ever blaming Steve Kerr for putting them in that position to begin with. What happens to Andrew Wiggins when he's forced to play the power forward position? What happens is that he no longer is capable of doing the job that he does best, which is playing POA, right? You cannot play POA and power forward at the same time. These are two completely different roles. So think about when Steve Kerr puts out a lineup of, let's say, Steph Curry, Schroeder, and Potts, or Steph Curry, Potts, Buddy Hield, these nonsensical three-guard lineups with no power behind their defense, right? And then you put Andrew Wiggins at the 4, and then on top of that, you have a small Draymond Green at the 5 next to him. And it's almost like I have to talk about this every single game because it's a mistake that is being made every single game. And the sad thing about it is that they really weren't making these mistakes in the first 11 games. They were going with much bigger lineups. There were small occasions where they went with smaller lineups. And that's okay as long as Steph Curry is hyper aggressive and there's a purpose and a reason behind why they would go small. I want you guys all to think about why the Warriors would go small. Why would Steve Kerr elect to go with a small lineup? There's only one singular reason why you would go with a small lineup, guys. And that is to empower your offense. Your offense is so good and so powerful with 3 guards on the floor at the same time that it's actually deemed worthy of using a small lineup to attack the other team and make them vulnerable. Does that ever happen with the Warriors whenever they run their 3-guard lineups? No, it does not. Oftentimes, they're not even running the pick and roll when they're running these smaller lineups, which then defeats the entire purpose of going small because you're sacrificing your defense, obviously, right? Everybody understands that when you go with a lineup that is Steph Curry, Pods, and Buddy Hield, you are sacrificing your defense. And if that sacrifice is not worth it, you're not getting a great offensive production out of those 3 guys. And it's nothing close to a cheat code, which again is the only reason you would go with a smaller lineup. Then there's no purpose to that smaller lineup other than you are hurting your team from a defensive standpoint and your defense is constantly inconsistent in certain areas of the game. And honestly, these are things that you can only really tell by fully watching the game. The stats are never really going to tell you the full story. And think about this. When you run a lineup like that, Steph Curry, Potts, Buddy Hield, Steph Curry, Dennis Schroeder, Buddy Hield, that's just an insane lineup, right? Think about what you're doing to Steph Curry. 36-year-old, soon to be 37-year-old Steph Curry. Steph Curry is a super capable defender as a point guard. But when you're forcing him to the 2 because you want to play him next to Dennis Schroeder, what are you doing to Steph Curry? You are forcing him to be tougher on defense than he needs to be or should be at this juncture of his career. And another thing, if you're playing Dennis Schroeder and Buddy Hield next to Steph Curry, that essentially makes Steph Curry the most powerful defender out of all 3 of those guys. From an overall standpoint, not just a POA, not just off-ball defense, but last I checked, the 1 and the 2 and the 3 also have to contribute from a rebounding standpoint. Who is the best rebounder out of Dennis Schroeder, Steph Curry, and Buddy Hield? It is Steph Curry. You're forcing him to do an awful lot. News broke yesterday that Mo Wagner of the Orlando Magic suffered a torn ACL. His season is done. And that is really unfortunate for him. Prayers to him and hoping for a speedy recovery. But at the end of the day, that is a devastating injury. And it's really lip service when you talk about speedy recovery. There's no such thing as a speedy recovery from a torn ACL. That is a very difficult injury to come back from. A long road ahead. At least a year before this guy can come back and do anything close to what he's done prior to that injury. We all know Klay suffered that injury as well. Combined with the Achilles tear, he came back and was never the same defender ever again. These are the things that the players are putting on the line. And unfortunately, the Twitter crowd didn't understand the point that I was trying to make. But the Warriors players put it on the line every single night. And these are the types of injuries that they are risking whenever they go out there to perform in front of the millions of fans around the world that is watching their games. That means Steve Kerr has to be the most caring person in terms of maximizing this team and making sure that he's protecting, number 1, his franchise player. Number 2, making sure that you are consistently putting out an optimized lineup that is going to allow the Warriors to be the strongest version of themselves, not have these nonsensical fundamental breaks all over the place, all over the map, constantly throughout the game, which actively makes it harder for the Warriors to win any given game on both ends of the floor And then all these games are super close. It comes down to the wire, and then you start blaming anybody but Steve Kerr for these fundamental errors that put them in that position in the first place. I'll give you the perfect example. The Warriors had an 8-point deficit going into halftime because they elected to once again close with a nonsensical small lineup that took away whatever momentum the Warriors had in the first half. And tonight we welcome back the return of the all-nightmarish 4-guard lineup. Yes, Steve Kerr rolled out a lineup in the third quarter featuring Steph Curry, Brandon Pajemski, Buddy Hield, Moses Moody, and Kevon Looney. Regardless of the short-term results that you may see out of these lineups, fundamentally speaking, the Warriors can never be considered a serious team as long as they continue to roll out these senseless and silly 3-guard and 4-guard lineups. There is zero defensive force behind any of those lineups, and that is what makes them unserious. And again, what's sad is that the Warriors once again had a lead in this game, a sizable lead that they could have built upon had Steve Kerr made better decisions in this game. They had a 9-point lead in the middle of that second quarter, and then again, Steve Kerr elected to go with small lineups, and these small lineups are just the destroyer of all momentum, and they are the destroyer of anything good the Warriors can do defensively. No matter how much some of these lineups perform from an offensive standpoint, you're just giving it all back to the other team anyway, and that's what makes you unserious. And that's why people around the league never took small ball seriously. And that's exactly what's happened with the Warriors over the last 3 years. Except Steve Kerr, half the time, isn't even running a small lineup anymore. He's literally running the tiniest lineups that have ever existed in the NBA. And as long as Steve Kerr continues to exist for this team, as long as the Warriors are overly relying on a bunch of guards to come through for them game in and game out, this team is never going to be serious. You know, Moses Moody made a comeback this game, and next thing you know, he's being put next to Potts and Steph Curry or Dennis Schroeder, and these things just don't make any sense. Moses Moody is a shooting guard. Potts is a shooting guard. I'm not even going to call him a combo guard anymore because he clearly doesn't have point guard capabilities. So essentially, the Warriors have to choose between Potts and Moses Moody. This is what they have to do. They can't be putting these guys on the floor at the same time while Slo-Mo is rotting on the bench. The only viable power forward that Mike Dunleavy went and picked up in the offseason is not even playing after starting the last game and helped the Warriors win that game, set the tone as a starter early on, and then never to be found again. And in games like this, it's impossible for me to appreciate whatever individual things that players did that warrants giving them credit for, whether it's Trayce Jackson and some of the great things that he did in this game, whether it's Jonathan Kuminga having a fantastic all-around game, or Paz coming out with some infused energy and generally playing much better than what he has throughout the course of this season. Why? Because Steve Kerr is the destroyer of all good things. And now you see why I get annoyed when they get these isolated wins when they should just be losing these games because they don't deserve to win it. Like that Timberwolves game that they absolutely should have lost before Steph Curry decided to bail out Steve Kerr. Like I keep saying, it's harder for the front office to make a clear decision on Steve Kerr when they keep yo-yoing back and forth between wins and losses. And by the way, one of those key teasers that I was telling you about earlier to start this video is that how you identify good leadership, whether it's a coach, whether it's a general manager, whether it's an owner, is to identify pattern recognition. You must be able to recognize patterns in the quickest way possible so that you can draw conclusions quickly and make quick adjustments. In terms of coaching, well, that's what makes you a great coach. The X's and O's, everybody in the league knows. Every NBA coach knows the X's and O's. That is not what makes a coach great. What makes a coach great is recognizing which players can do what, which players are great together and which players are not great together, and then being able to recognize and identify those things and then properly organize. The quicker you do that, the quicker your team can be really good. When you hear Steve Kerr, Steph Curry, year after year after year talking about, oh, we're experimenting with this and that. Steph Curry literally after the Timberwolves game in the post-game conference was talking about how the team had been experimenting with things, which is why they had been 3-9 in their last 12 games. If you've been the head coach of a basketball team for the last 10 years and you don't know this team inside out, knows exactly what works, knows exactly what doesn't, and can't combine those things together to make sure that everything is in order, and you're constantly experimenting left and right, even into the playoffs, maybe you just don't know what you're actually doing, and you're living off of reputation of those first 5 years, when literally every time this guy was replaced, whether it was by Luke Walton, whether it was by Mike Brown, they were always out-coaching this guy, which shows you that he was always replaceable during that dynastic run. Always. It literally happened. The second year he had a spine issue and Luke Walton took over and went 39-4. 39-4. Why did Steve Kerr ever need to come back that season? The answer is he did not need to come back. What about the following season in the playoffs when he once again missed time and Mike Brown had to take over and he proceeded to go 11-0 in the playoffs? Why did Steve Kerr need to come back in game 2 of the finals? The answer is he did not need to come back. The Warriors would have won anyway. And look, this guy has zero capability of developing anybody. That's been the case all throughout the last 5 years or so. And every single year, without fail, this guy is experimenting, compromising the trajectory of the team. And the team is always yo-yoing back and forth between wins and losses. The team is constantly in play-in situations, and they're never a serious team. So yes, when you have the mind of a goldfish, you don't have any capability of recognizing patterns when they happen game after game after game. The guy is married to his ideologies, and to be fair to him, at least he's freaking faithful. No matter how many times the thing fails over and over, the guy will keep going to it religiously. Okay, teaser number 2. Steph Curry. As long as he keeps going with these Steve Kerr plans and keep joining him for this ride and thinking that it's all okay and fine and dandy, well, get compromised. Let your legacy be compromised. Don't make it to the All-Star game as a starter because you're not playing like one that deserves to be an All-Star starter. Get called a shooter by people around the league because that's the role that you play, like you have Steve Kerr's name in the back of your jersey rather than Steph Curry. Keep wasting entire first quarters and third quarters doing absolutely nothing and running cardio all day while letting your teammates flounder without you being more involved. All in the name of, well, you're a nice guy and you're kind and you care about your relationships. Well, let your legacy get bent then. Let it get bent. To be honest with you, Steph Curry, you really should be listening to me a lot more than you listen to Steve Kerr, because Steve Kerr has never had the level of belief in you the way I have had since your rookie year, damn it. Do you remember when I told to your face that you need to be separated from Monte Ellis for you to become what you could become? Because if you kept playing next to Monte Ellis, you never would have become the player that you became. But you being the nice guy that you are, you would have never wanted to have separated from Monte Ellis, right? This is why you need better leadership in the front office to make decisions that Steph Curry absolutely cannot make as a player. The biggest flaw of Steph Curry is that he has zero killer mentality outside of when he persistently has the ball. He doesn't have a killer mentality about teammates. He doesn't have a killer mentality about coaches. He doesn't have a killer mentality about front office and the ownership. And these are the results that you've been getting for the last 5 years. Either wake up and be louder about it or deal with the consequences of mediocrity. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.